My name is Ilara, and I'm 23 years old. I got home early one quiet Tuesday, the kind of day where the persistent rain muffled the rest of the world. My shift at the cafe had been cut short, and the thought of an empty house to myself for a few hours was a rare and welcome change. I lived with my mom, my stepdad Mark, and my younger sister Emily. For the past 5 years since Mark had moved in, our family had settled into a predictable, if sometimes tense, rhythm. Mark was the type of guy who seemed to pride himself on being a good provider. He'd fix things around the house, make jokes at the dinner table, and always insisted on paying for everything. But there was a possessive streak to his generosity, a kind of unspoken debt he expected you to repay. As I took my shoes off, my brief moment of relief evaporated. A faint sound reached me from the hallway, a choked-back sob. It was Emily, and she was crying. This wasn't the dramatic teenage crying I was used to hearing. This was quiet, wounded weeping, the kind that spoke of something deeply wrong. The sound was coming from Mark's room. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Mark's room was a place of unspoken boundaries. Emily, at 14, was a fiercely private person. She would never willingly be in there. I crept down the hall, my own breathing silent, my hand hovering over the half-open door. Through the narrow gap I saw them. Mark was sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to me. His voice a low, chilling whisper. Emily was on the floor in the corner. Her body curled into a small, trembling ball. She was clutching her phone, a picture of her boyfriend, Alex, on the screen, her face streaked with tears. Mark wasn't touching her, but the look on his face, the predatory glint in his eyes that I had never seen before, was a physical act of violence. I suddenly understood the full story. Emily had been saving money for weeks to buy Alex a new pair of sneakers for his birthday, something expensive he had always wanted. She had been working extra hours babysitting, but she was still short. Desperate, and seeing the thick wad of cash Mark always kept in his wallet on his nightstand, she took a few $100s, promising herself she'd replace it. Mark, of course, had noticed. He pointed a finger at the phone in her hand. "If you tell anyone about the money you borrowed from my wallet, I'll make sure your little boyfriend pays. You know I can find him." The words weren't a threat. They were a promise. A promise of control, of malice, of a power he had over her that was far more terrifying than any physical blow. This wasn't a punishment for a bad grade or a grounded teenager. This was a violation. He had backed her into a corner, using a small mistake, a few $100s taken from his wallet, as leverage to exert a far more sinister kind of control. I backed away silently, my mind a storm of fear and disbelief. I wanted to run in, to shout, to tear him away from her. But my hands were shaking too badly to form a fist. I knew I couldn't confront him. The house was too quiet, and I was no match for him. The only thing I could do was get help. I stumbled back into the living room, my legs unsteady beneath me. With a shaking hand, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" a calm, steady voice asked. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady myself. "There's a girl in danger," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "My sister. She's in my stepdad's room. He's threatening her. I'm afraid for her safety." I rattled off the address, my words tumbling over each other in a panicked rush. The operator, a true professional, kept me on the line, talking me through what to do and where to go to be safe. I hid in the garage, listening to the muffled sounds from inside the house, my heart thumping so loudly I was sure they could hear it on the other end of the line. The sirens were the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I watched through a crack in the garage door as the officers stormed the house. Minutes later, they emerged with Emily, her small hand in a kind officer's much larger one. She looked terrified, but she was safe. A third officer led Mark out in handcuffs, his face a mask of shock and fury. He caught my eye for a brief moment, and the look he gave me was one of pure, unadulterated hatred. I knew that my life and my family's had been changed forever. But as I watched Emily get into the police car, safe and sound, I knew I had done the only thing I could have. I hadn't been able to protect her from the darkness, but I had made sure she would be free from it.